Okay, so Shabbat Shalom, everybody, for those online, those in person, and those that'll watch later. This week's parsha is actually Deuteronomy 7, starts in verse 12 and goes to chapter 11, verse 25. Deuteronomy 7:12 is where it starts, and it is called Eikev. And in this week's parsha, it continues with Moses' final words, and it also holds. This parsha holds a lot about loving Yah, which is interesting because we only see the word love in this portion 7 times, but this portion is all about love. Okay, so before we get into it, I got to thinking about it for a minute, and we think about, okay, what's when Yeshua was asked, what's the greatest command, and he said, to love Yah with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. But what does that mean? What does love mean?
Enduring.
Okay. What do you think it means? What was that, Sandra?
Unconditional.
Yeah, but what is love? I mean, is it an emotion? How do you love Yah? You think about it.
Yeah, it's an emotion.
All encompassing.
Yeah, we think about So when we think about it, if we go even before we even get there, go to John 14 and verse 15. Because we think of love as an emotion or a feeling, and it's not really a feeling. And so John 14 and verse 15 says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another comforting counsel like the one, the Spirit of truth, to be with you forever. So, and if you keep going down to verse 21 there in 14, it says, whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. So
there you have it.
Yeah.
It's action.
It's action. You got it. And the one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and reveal myself to him. So, we, tend to think about, well, wait a minute. Love is an emotion, and it's not really this feeling. It is an action. And that is one of the biggest differences between the Greek and the Hebrew mindset, because in the Greek mindset, it's, I'll just say I love you and I love you. But in the Hebrew mindset, it is, if I say it and I'm not acting on it, then I don't believe it.
You're not showing love.
Yeah,
you could say it, but if you don't show it, then you're not really meaning it.
Right. You've got to show it. It's an action there. You got to show that what you show that love, you're showing it by your action. And this is exactly what James says in James chapter 2, since we're there. In James chapter 2, and I'm going to go down to verse 18. It says, but someone will say to you that you have faith and I have actions. Show me this faith of yours without the actions. So if you're just saying, I believe, but you have no actions, he says, wait a minute, I'll show you my faith by my actions. You believe that the God is one. Well, good for you, because the demons believe it too. The thought makes them shudder with fear. But the foolish fellow, do you want to be shown that such a faith apart from actions is barren? Wasn't Avraham Avinu declared righteous because of his actions when he offered up his son Yitzhak on the altar? You see that his faith worked by his actions, and by the actions the faith was made complete. And the passage of the Tanakh, which was fulfilled, it said Abraham had faith in God, and it was credited to him as on account as righteousness. He was even called God's friend. You see that a person is declared righteous because of his actions and not because of faith alone. So what does that sentence right there just say?
To have
Are you
both.
declared righteous by just saying, I believe? No, he says it is you got to say and do.
Mhm.
Well, the word there, the most word there, it says complete.
Yeah, it's
You
complete.
need
Yeah,
both
you need both. Yep.
together, faith and action to show your faith.
Yep. And then in verse 25, it says, likewise, wasn't Rahab the prostitute also declared righteous because of her actions when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another route? Indeed, just as the body without a spirit is dead, so too faith without actions is dead.
Did you think, though, right, was she a righteous woman, though, really, or
Her
did
actions,
she turn?
that way because of what she said. Yes, because of what she did. So it's like, you know, it
She was trusted.
yeah, because she was a prostitute, but because of the fact that she turned and she helped them and she actually saw that God was with them and she said, okay, well, I'm going to act on it. I have to show that I'm
I want your God.
right. And that made me think about,
And her faith.
yeah, her whole family was saved. Yeah. And you think about too, you know, it made me think about the Holocaust.
Mhm.
What about during the Holocaust? All of those believers that sat there and did nothing.
No action there.
I'm sorry, what you said.
So I just said, think about the Holocaust. All of
Mhm.
those believers that sat by and watched things happen.
So think that.
Well, the
And same things that are happening now. Yeah.
church was complacent.
Right. And and they were helping. And so not only that, but you think about what's going on in the world now. How many people today are watching things go on and not standing up? So, and that is, you know, I think this goes right along with it because Yeshua says, you know, if you love me, you're going to obey my commands. And so it is about those actions. So in this parsha, it is about obedience. And Moshe understands the importance of obeying and keeping Yah's commands. And this is specifically getting ready to talk about when they go into the promised land. Because there are some commands that are very specific to living in the land of Israel. You know, there are some commands that you can't really keep outside of the, you know, the land, you know.
Well, yeah, there's specific.
Yeah, there's some specific in the land. Right. Right.
In the land. It's
Right.
To do that, you know, you're not, listen, I know some Jews, when they come anywhere in the United States, they don't
Can you hear him?
do things like
Yeah.
they do
Okay.
in Israel.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there are some that you can, you know, that you have to do in the land. So another way to think about this, then there are commands that are basically, you know, these commands are a preparation for us living in the kingdom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if we're to live in his kingdom, he's a king. You know, kings have rules. You don't live in their kingdom without certain rules. And so this is, you know, a lot of these, this is why I said this parsha is all about love, because even though it doesn't use the word love, it is about how we love him. Okay. And a lot of people look at us and say, oh, well, you're living under the law. Well, no, I love him. So I'm trying to obey his word, which he says is showing your love.
That word, when they use living under
The law. Yeah.
it's not even in the Bible.
Like that, yeah.
They put that in the word.
So,
You know, as part, that has nothing to do
well,
with
how it, yeah.
living right. No.
Okay. So let's go to Deuteronomy 7. And I'm going to go down to verse 12. And it starts with, because, Eikev, if you are listening to these rulings, keeping and obeying them, Yah your Elohim will keep you with the covenant and mercy that he swore to your ancestors. He will love you, bless you, and increase your numbers. He will also bless the fruit of your body and the fruit of the ground, your grain, wine, olive oil, and the young of your cattle and sheep. In the land he swore to your ancestors that he would give you. You will be blessed more than all other peoples. There will be not a sterile male or female among you, and the same with your livestock. Yah will remove and all illnesses from you. He will not afflict you with any of Egypt's dreadful diseases, which you have known. Instead, he will lay them on those who hate you. So, like I said, the very first word here, Eikev, is translated as because. In some translations, they'll say it's if you obey. But it's really better translated as like as a consequence or a result of something, because what this starts with is the consequences or the results or the reward for being obedient to his commands. If you hear and you do, then Yah says, these are, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to guard you. I'm going to guard you with my covenant and my hesed, which, that really stuck out to me this time when I read it, is not only that he says he's going to guard you with the covenant, but also with his hesed, his mercy, his grace. That's the word that's unmerited favor that he's guarding us with. And, that's what we need is unmerited favor. So, and Eikev is one of those unusual words because, like I said, it's often translated as if, but the word if in Hebrew is ki, and it's not really that, or im, depending on how it's used. But Yah is very specific on his words. And so when we look at this, I think this word was used for a specific reason. And when we look at Eikev, it is actually used 15 times in the Torah. And when we write the number 15 in Hebrew, it is Yod, which is 10, and Hey, which is 5. So Yod Hey, which is the shortened version of his name, Yah. Okay. And it's about doing his commands. And I know last week we talked about the 10 words or the 10 commandments and some of the connections there. And there's another one with this parsha, because when we look at this word Eikev, and I know a lot of people don't get into the numerical gematria of words, but when you look at the word Eikev, it is written Ayin Kuf Beit. Okay. Ayin Kuf Beit. And that is actually the value 172. Okay. 172. So Ayin Kuf Beit, which is Eikev, is 172. And when you look at the 10 commandments that we looked at last week in Exodus 20 and starts in verse 2, and you go all the way down through the end of the 10 commandments, I don't know, I think it's verse 17, I think it is, that there are actually 172 words in the 10 commandments.
Oh, wow.
So there are 172, that's Hebrew words. There are 172 Hebrew words. And then this word Eikev is, a consequence. Well, it's a consequence of what? Of obeying his commands. So it's about guarding and keeping his commands. And that, it's linking back to this obedience in his word. And so I started looking up too, and in scripture, the number 172 is only used one time that I found. And it is in the book of Nehemiah. So I'm going to go over to Nehemiah chapter 11 and verse 9. It's 11:19, not 9, 19. And this is the only time that I've seen it used. And this is talking about the gatekeepers. And it says the gatekeepers, Akuv, Talman, and their kinsmen who kept watch at the gates numbered 172.
Hmm.
And so there are 172 gatekeepers, which were to do what? They were to protect the gates. Well, if you're if you love him and you are wanting to obey him, you are guarding his word. You are guarding those gates. That's what you're to do. And so I found that interesting that is the only time in scripture that we have that 172 that I can find is there in Nehemiah. And it's talking about that's how many gatekeepers there were. So
Neat.
now the other word, Eikev, is also Eikev from the root Eikev, which is where we get Jacob's name. Okay, because Jacob, if you add the yod to the beginning of Eikev, it's actually Yaakov. And Eikev, we know his name meant to, it's translated to the root meaning to supplant or some circumvent, but it's heel because Jacob's name is heel. And so this parasha is also talking about the heel. Or, if your heel, it's your footprint, the rear part, the last part. So this parasha is also linked with being the end generation, the last generation, what a lot of times they'll call the heel generation, because it's coming at the very end. A lot of times in Hebrew, we'll say the Aher Hayamim, the last days. Well, this is talking about the generation that is during that time. And when we think about the heel, well, the heel in a normal pregnancy is the last part of the body to come out of the womb. And so that's why this part is referred to as that last generation. And it also denotes, you're walking, because if you're walking, you're putting your heel down and, you should be walking out his words. This is where we think about the halakha, how you are walking out his words. And it is putting our heels on the path of his words, and that we're going to see those positive consequences when we're doing that. But if we choose not to put our heels on the path of his words or his following his commands, then what are we doing? Our heel is basically stomping on his word. And so then we can see the negative consequences of that. So, and I found a verse in Psalms, and I want to read this one. You can just jot it down in Psalms 119 in verse 12 that also has this word Eikev in it. Psalms 119 and verse 112 says, I have resolved to obey your laws forever at every step. Or Eikev, your heel print at every footstep. Yeah, that's David. So we are to be following after the footsteps of Yeshua, hard after the footsteps of Yeshua. And, when we think about when you're following someone, if you're, today, like if you're going on a trip and you're following someone, you're driving behind them, what are you going to do? You're going to drive real close behind them. And it's the same implication when we are to follow after Yeshua. We should be walking so close to him that really nobody can get in front of us. Nobody can get between us, that we're not going to wander off to the left or the right. And there is actually this Hebrew saying that talks about this, because in ancient times, the disciples as well as students would actually follow after their rabbis, because their teacher would go from town to teach, and they would follow behind them, sitting and learning from them. That's exactly what happened with Yeshua and his Talmudim. His disciples, they would follow with him. And, so they were learning how to walk after their Messiah. And, when the rabbi would come to the town, the disciples would be, his students would be following close behind him. And, the inference that they make was it was like a mother duck and her ducklings, when you think about them walking. And as a result, this blessing arose in religious communities that would say, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And so it's even said today that, when students are learning that they say, oh, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Well, they're not really walking in places that's dusty today. But if you think about this, in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 6, it says this. A person who claims to be continuing in union with him ought to conduct his life in the way that he did. So he's telling us there that we need to be following after our Messiah, that we need to be following in his ways. 1 John 2 and 6. Yes.
Then you just don't get saved, then you go back and do your own ways. Like a lot of people say, well, I'm saved now, I do what I want now. No, that's abuse of grace.
Right. And even in 1 Peter 2 and 21, it says almost the same thing. In 1 Peter 2 and 21, it says, indeed, this is what you were called to, because the Messiah too suffered on your behalf, leaving an example so that you should follow in his footsteps. So again, that's showing us that he's showing us the example of how we should be living or doing. So we should be following after that. Now, think about that with the dust, okay? Because I want to look at a couple of places in the New Testament before we go back to the portion. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 11, Mark chapter 6 and verse 11. Well, I'll go back to verse 10. It says, whenever you enter a house and you stay there until you leave the place, and if the people of some place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, he's talking to his disciples, then as you leave, shake the dust off your feet as a warning to them. You think, how is this going to be a warning to them? Because you're just shaking dust off your feet. Okay. He says the same thing in Luke chapter 9 and verse 5. It says, wherever they don't welcome you, shake the dust from your feet when you leave that town as a warning for them. Okay. And we actually see an application of this in Acts chapter 13 and verse 51. In Acts 13 and 51, it talks about Saul and Barabbas, not Barabbas, Barabbas here. But they shook the dust off of their feet against them and came unto them at Iconium. Okay, so we see them shaking the dust off their feet. Well, wait a minute. That's not going to be a big deal. They live in the Middle East. They're shaking the dust off. But he says, you're doing this as a warning to them. Because if you see disciples or you see these students that are following after this rabbi come to a town and all of a sudden they're not welcomed or whatever, they're actually, and then they go and they start shaking the dust off of their feet. They're doing it as a sign to say that, you know what, we're separating from you. Your beliefs, and it's showing everybody around what you believe doesn't hold with what we believe. That you're rejecting the teachings of our Messiah. So this gesture was to show them you're making a wrong choice. Your choice isn't aligning up with the person that we follow.
So that was a gesture that they had started doing, showing. I mean, everybody would know that.
Right.
Thing. They seen that. They're saying, oh,
they're not, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, sometimes, and this is why it's such a big deal, when you have people that are doing things that aren't biblical, and they come into a congregation, Well, other people, if they know that person and they see, oh, they're going out and doing this on Friday and Saturday or whatever, and yet they're coming into the congregation. Well, those people are judging that congregation and saying, well, they must agree with it. They must say it's okay, you know? And so here is a way that, you know, they're showing we don't hold to that. We're separating from you that it doesn't line up with our rabbi.
We are different from
That
them.
we're different from them.
Agree with what they're doing.
Right. And this was something that was visual to show that people could see it. Now, let's go to John chapter 6. John chapter 6. And I'm going to go to talk about, let's see. Well, okay, let's just go to verse 45 and start there. John 6 and verse 45. It is written in the prophets that they will all be taught by Yah. Everyone who listens to the Father and learns from him comes to me. Not anyone who has seen the Father except the one who is from Elohim. He has seen the Father. Yes, indeed, I tell you that whoever trusts has eternal life. I'm the bread which is life. Your fathers ate the manna in the desert and they died. But the bread that comes down from heaven is such that a person may eat it and not die. I am the living bread that has come down from heaven. And if anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. Furthermore, the bread that I will give to you, or I give, is my own flesh, and I will give it for the life of the world. At this, the Judeans disputed with one another, saying, how can this man give us flesh to eat? And then Yeshua said to them, yes, indeed, I tell you that unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life in yourselves. Now, wait a minute. We think about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually,
Yes. This is how the transubstantiation. But we know this really goes against Torah because you're not to eat or drink blood. Okay.
Don't the Catholics?
Yeah, the Catholics believe in transubstantiation. That it turns into the blood and the flesh. Yes. Yeah, and that's totally against Torah. So, and in verse 54, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. So it looks like, they're looking at it saying, wait a minute, we're not supposed to do this. I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food and my blood is true drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me and I live in him. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live through the Father, so also whoever eats me will live through me. So this is the bread that has come down from heaven. It is not like the bread the fathers ate. They're dead, but whoever eats this bread will live forever. So he said these things when he was teaching in a synagogue in Capernaum. That's, right there on the Sea of Galilee where Peter's house was now.
Yeshua told me how in the word.
Yeah, it is exactly. And then when you think about on hearing this, look at what in verse 60, on hearing it, many of his Talmudim said, this is a hard word. Who can bear to listen to it? Okay. But Yeshua, aware that his Talmudim were grumbling about this, said to them, this is a trap for you. Suppose you were to see the Son of Man going back up to where he was before. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help. The words I've spoken to you are spirit and life. Yet some among you do not trust, do not believe. For Yeshua knew from the outset there would be ones who would not trust him, were also the one who betray him. And this, he said, is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has made it possible for him. From this time on, look at this. from this time on, many of his Talmudim, his students, turned back and no longer traveled around with him.
Mm.
And Yeshua said to the 12, don't you want to leave too? And the Kifa answered and said, Lord, to whom will we go? You have the word of eternal life. And so when we look at this, think about his students that were following along behind him. Some of these students said, wait a minute, Yeshua is saying a hard word. And they didn't want to hear a hard word. They don't want to face hard.
Yeah.
So if you think about, how many today are following behind some teacher or whatever, or they're going to a church and they don't want to hear a hard word. Oh, I'll leave and I'll go somewhere else. They don't want to hear that. And that's what exactly, think about Yeshua. Yeshua himself had students who left him and said, oh, okay, no, that's too hard. I'm not going to follow that. Why? Because this is something that he's talking about, not my body is physically becoming this, but they didn't see the metaphor, the picture that it was being displayed here.
Yeah, he even answered them like when they was making that statement.
Mhm.
Well, Yeshua answered them and said, this is a trap for you.
Yeah, this is a trap because we have a choice.
See it, and understand.
Yeah.
Right. And he's saying that, many are turning and not following me. Why? Because you have a choice to make. Just like these people in the wilderness had to go out and they had to rely on Yah each day to provide this manna. And he's saying that my body is like that bread. It is that manna. So you're going to have to rely on me and you're going to have to do what I command.
He tells them plainly when he's answering them back after they say something, he's answering them back and telling them, yes, it's a trap for you. I'm trying to make you see what is going to happen if you keep going the way you're going and not go my way and follow me, and do what I say. Right.
There's, I'll put a link in the video, the description box if you want to see, but, the Israeli group Solu, which is, Shiloh and Sarah and Rebecca and Levi and everybody, the Dean, that they did this song, a song based on this verse. And so I'll put it in the video if you want to watch that. So
he was on an interview yesterday at some church he was at. His baby got dropped on his head and they had to rush him to the emergency room.
Yeah.
And he was giving his testimony.
You saw
that before he said it was okay. The baby was okay, but said it right there was scary moments. If when he was giving his testimony, he said when they were on the plane, he said, I don't like flying turbulence, But he said my two daughters sitting over like it was
like a ride. Yeah, it's like a ride. So okay, so going back to Deuteronomy.
Hey, Lisa.
Go ahead.
I just looked at this right now, but in the Strong's Concordance, that word for eat my flesh is G5176. But I was looking at it, and there's another word that's related to that, which it means a worn way or a path. So, I guess you could maybe say, by doing this is a path. This is the way.
Right. Yeah, so, it is a path. It's a way to, that we should, if you're consuming it, it's a way that you're going, you're taking it in, you're living it out. Because when you are taking something in, it goes back to it being in action. You're going to do something with it. We take in food, not just to have food, but we're taking it in our body to do stuff, to give us energy so that we can do things. It is, and it's tied to that action. So yeah, I can definitely see where it's linked with that. Okay. So going back to Deuteronomy 7, verse 12, we're still on the first verse, but it says, because Eikev, you are listening to these rulings, keeping and obeying them, Yah your Elohim will keep the covenant and the mercy that he swore to your ancestors. So it starts off by Yahah Eikev Tishma'un. And so we've got that Tishma'un, which is, if you read that in Hebrew, and it's, if you're looking by Hayah is, and it shall be. Eikev is because or as a consequence, and Tishma'un, you've got that Shema in there, which is to hear, but it is Tishma'un, which puts it in the future tense. And so it is talking about those that are hearing and obeying in the future. So, which is suggesting that it's not just for those that were there at that time with Moses. This is also talking to us who weren't there with Moses. It was written also for us. And this is a promise of obedience for us in the future. Because, if you turn over in Deuteronomy in chapter 29, remember in Deuteronomy 29 and verse 14 that Moses says, to Deuteronomy 29:14. And these were Moses's words, and Yah says that rather I'm making it, talking about the covenant, both with him who is standing here with us today before Yah our Elohim, and also with him who is not here with us today. So he's saying, it is not only for those that were there, but it's also those promises are for us that for in the future who would obey and keep his covenant. Okay, Deuteronomy 7:13 says that he will love you, bless you, and increase your numbers. He will also bless the fruit of your body, the fruit of the ground, your grain, your wine, olive oil, and the young of your cattle and sheep in the land he swore to your ancestors that he would give to you. And we all want blessings, but blessings come from doing.
Mhm.
And when you look at this verse, actually, the way it's linked together, there's, typically 7 blessings here. And that 7 is linked with the number of perfection and completion. And when it talks about the fruit of your ground and, it's talking, it's linking together, like you think about the fruit, it would be the wine and the olive oil, because both of those are fruit, and then you've got grain, and then you also have got your flocks too. So it ends up being 7 blessings. And so I think it's interesting because that word fruit is pre, and pre, pay, resh, yud. Pay is the mouth, resh is the head, and yod is the hand. So the mouth, the head, and the hand. So he's going to bless our fruit, that which we speak, that which we think, and that which we do.
Wow.
So I got to thinking about it's speaking, thinking, and doing is the word fruit here. And, even in, the Brit Hadashah, what was it, Matthew, it says that you're going to know them by their fruit.
Speaking, thinking, and what?
Doing. Yeah. So you think about the word pre for fruit is pay, which is your mouth, resh, which is your head, and your hand.
There's the 7 species.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
So, but I thought that was interesting that it links with, the fruit there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then 2, there were 7. So if we go back to the beginning, not of this parsha, but if you go back at the beginning of chapter 7 of Deuteronomy, this is what I saw, because a lot of times, even though I start a parasha and it starts in the middle of the chapter or something, I'll go back and read, the whole chapter to see what happened before that. And when I did that, I saw something else here in Deuteronomy 7:1. Look at this. Yah, your Elohim, is going to bring you into the land you will enter in order to take possession of it. He will expel many nations ahead of you: the Hittite, the Girgashi, the Emori, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Yebusi. 7 nations bigger and stronger than you. When he does this, when Yah, your Elohim, hands them over ahead of you, and you will defeat them, you are to destroy them completely. Do not make any covenant with them. No, wait a minute. How many blessings did we just say that there were? 7. And how many nations were to be expelled from the land? Is that were 7. So I thought, wait a minute, he's linking these nations that they were to expel from the land also with the blessings that they were to have when they come into the land.
And he's telling them he's going to expel them, and he's going to take all those out, wipe them
Yeah.
out for them to have these blessings later.
Yeah.
They, once they take that land, then the blessings will be theirs.
Yeah. And verse 16, Deuteronomy 7:16, going back, you are to devour all the peoples that Yah, your Elohim, hands over to you. Show them no pity. Do not serve their gods, because they will become a trap for you. If you think to yourselves, these nations outnumber us, how can we dispossess them? Nevertheless, you are not to be afraid of them. You are to remember well what Yah, your Elohim, did to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt. The great ordeals which you yourself saw, the signs, the wonders, the strong hand and outstretched arm by which Yah, your Elohim, brought you out. Yah will do the same to all the peoples of whom you were afraid. Moreover, Yah, your Elohim, will send the hornet among them until those who are left and those who hide themselves perish ahead of you. You are not to be frightened of them, because Yah, your Elohim, is there with you, a God great and fearsome. Yah, your Elohim, will dispel the nations ahead of you little by little. You can't put an end to them all at once, or the wild animals will become too numerous for you. Nevertheless, Yah, your Elohim, will give them over to you, sending one disaster after another upon them until they have been destroyed. He will hand their kings over to you, and you will wipe out their name from under heaven, and none of them will be able to stand against you until you have destroyed them.
Your question right there.
Mhm.
Starting at verse 20. When he uses the word moreover, you hardly ever hear that word.
Mhm.
But he said, moreover, Adonai your God will send the hornet on you. Moreover. So he's saying on top of this, does that mean I will add more or give you more?
No, in Hebrew it's vegam. It means gam is also.
So it's just saying, and also.
Also, yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just English translation, but it's vegam in Hebrew, so it's also.
Well, you hardly ever see it saying moreover.
Yeah.
It's always because or and therefore, but this
Right.
moreover.
Yeah, it's like and also. Yep, and also is what it is.
So it means what now?
And also.
And also.
Mhm. Okay, so this part I was looking at. Yah will send a hornet ahead of them.
Yes, that's another one. Yeah.
What do y'all think about that? Is he going to send bees or a swarm ahead of them? Yeah.
I think it's the enemy.
Well, he says he's going to send the head of him to just, to get rid of the enemies. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is it a disease or something?
A plague?
Yeah.
Plague.
So,
What's it say in the Hebrew there? I mean,
Azariah.
I'm looking at Hebrew, but it still says
Azariah, and it's, okay. So the word for hornet is Hazariah, which is, when I got to looking at it, most of the linguists and scholars say the origin's really unknown there. Okay. I did find that this word is also in Joshua 24. So let's go over to Joshua 24.
Joshua 20.
Mm-hmm. Joshua 24 and verse 11. It says, next you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. Sorry. Okay, I'll wait till you get there. 11. Next, you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The men of Jericho fought against you, the Amoree, the Perizzee, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Girgashi, the Hebai, the Yebusi, and I handed them over to you. And I sent a hornet ahead of you, driving them out from ahead of you.
So he said hornet.
A hornet. Okay.
Is that a powerful?
Okay, so
Angels.
I mean, there's a lot we don't really know. I mean, it does say that 2 kings of the Emory. It wasn't by your sword or your bow that they were taken out. So we know it's not something.
It just says
the so,
hornet.
Right.
Unless
Big,
it was
mighty,
one by
powerful.
the double horn.
It would be something big and mighty and powerful to go.
Well, and then so so I started looking up.
Yeah.
Okay, so I started looking up. I don't know. And so I started looking up, and the Strong's concordance, which Strong's is good, I think, for a basic knowledge on certain things, but even the Strong's is not, it's not the end all. Okay. And Strong's links it with Zaharat, with the leprosy, the spiritual leprosy. But what would spiritual leprosy have in connection with conquering the land?
Or saying the hornet.
Okay.
And one.
Because when you think about in Hebrew, there are connections between words, and this is just throwing an example out there, because the word davar, in Hebrew, is actually, when we think about Debbie, her name, Devorah, it means bee.
Yeah.
Okay, but wait a minute. Devorah, and Devar have the same root.
Word.
So what does a bee and the word have in common?
What's it?
Action.
What was that?
The action.
Well, they are
Action.
acting, but it
They
is
sting.
Strong.
Well,
word is strong.
But you go back to, what does he say his word is like?
A lamp.
Sweet as honey. It would be sweet as honey on their lips. Okay. So we think that is the connection with the 2 words when you got Devorah and the word for bee. But this word is not bee. It is actually Zariah. Okay.
So.
And when we think about, I got to looking up, and the word for wasp is actually Dov. Okay, so we also have like Dov and Davash being honey. Those have a connection, but Zaria doesn't really have a connection with bee or honey. So it's like, okay, that word that they're using there for hornet, Zaria, doesn't have a connection with the word bee at all, is what I'm saying. Okay. So it doesn't seem to be related to the bee family, which doesn't, linguistically fit in there.
The thing I can see is the hornet is deadly, and it can multiply and spread just like the rib.
Yeah, like Zarak is deadly and can spread. Yeah.
Spread. So
okay.
That's all the connections I see.
But when we look in Joshua, it clearly said that this hornet is going to go out against the Hittites and the Hivites and the Amorites, and it is going to, drive them out. And even I started looking Exodus 23 and verse 28, it says, I'm going to send hornets out ahead of you to drive out the Hebai, the Canaanite, and the Hittite before you. And so it's something that is going to be involved with conquering the land. But we know that in Joshua, it says it's got to be something that they're not going to be able to do with their bow and their arrows. So it's not connected with that. And when I started looking at 2, there is one instance in conquering the land that involved the Amorites and the Hivites that are both mentioned. Because when the Amorites attacked the Hivites after they were deceived by Israel, and if we go to Joshua chapter 10, This is where we see it, that those two are linked together. Those two groups of people are linked together. Okay, so Joshua chapter 10. And I'm going to go down to verse 5. So the 5 kings of the Emori, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Yarmut, Lachish, and Eglon, got together, went up with all their armies, pitched camp against the Givon, and made war against it. The people of Givon sent a message to Jehoshua at their camp in Gilgal, and that said, "Do not ignore your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the kings of the Emori living in the hills have gotten together to fight us." And Jehoshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the men fighting with him, including all the bravest ones. And Yah said to Jehoshua, "Don't be afraid of them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of their men will stand against you." Having spent the entire night marching up from Gilgal, Jehoshua fell upon them, taking them by surprise. And Yah threw them into a confusion before Israel and defeated them in a great slaughter at Givon, pursuing them along the road that goes up from Beit Horon, and beating them back to Ezekiah all the way to Makdah. And they fled before Israel down the road to Beit Horon, and Yah threw huge hailstones down on them all the way to Ezekiah, and they died. Yeah. More died because of the hail than because Israel had killed them with the sword.
So Adonai threw them in great
So
confusion.
what if the hornets were hailstones?
Yeah. So in that battle, we see there are 5 Amorite kings, not 2 that are mentioned in Joshua 24.
He threw them down.
Yeah, he threw hailstones. So if you look at, in Joshua 24, I got to going back and looking at that, and I was like, well, wait a minute. It said that 2, but could it mean Shnei also means like a second? Depends on which vowel pointings you had there. And so could it be that what Joshua 24 is saying is that these Amorite kings, when they came against them a second time, not 2 Amorite kings, but a second time, and that because that it would be that the hornet went out against them in the Israelites' second encounter, which wouldn't been achieved with a sword or a bow, but he did it with hail.
So was it Adonai
sending hail? Well, I think it's not necessarily him, but he's like, you see a connection here with, it's something that has to be divine.
Yeah. And him throwing down the hail.
And that,
it just don't hail in those places, so.
And then why is it that word Zariah? Because, when you look at all those other words for B, they all have a connection to Devar. Yeah. This one is a Zadi. And it doesn't have, it starts with a Zadi. It doesn't have that connection with Devar at all. Because this word in Hebrew, they say we don't know the origin of this word. They don't know where, where it's really what it really is.
Well, I'm thinking,
but when you look at
it, Adonai, and he's throwing all the hailstones down, and he said, he's killing them that way.
Yeah, and so I started looking. I know Jeff Benner with Ancient Hebrew Resource also research does a lot with the linguistics, and he wrote something here, and I thought this was really interesting. He wrote that the Zariah, the hornet, he believes is actually not written with a Zadi, but written with a Zion, because the Zadi and the Zion make the same sound, the Z sound, okay? And he links it with the connection of Zerah, meaning the word seed, because Zerah is written with a Zion instead of a Zadi. But it has the idea of scattering or sowing a seed, and it carries with it not only the idea of reproduction, but planting seeds or knowledge in someone's heart. And so when you look at that word Zerah, it's spelled Zion, Resh, Ayin, Zion, Resh, Ayin. But it can also be read, depending on which vowel pointings you're putting, Zeroah, which is the arm or the strength or the shoulder or power. So wait a minute. And he's like, well, I think that what's happened is because it was the same sound that letter got misinterpreted. And it really should be Zion, Resh, Ayin, which goes back to the word seed, but it's also the word arm. Because what is Yeshua? But the arm or the strength of Yah. He's seated at the right hand, the Zaroah. And that he's like, I'm seeing that word hornet as actually, it's talking about the Zaroah, the arm of Yah.
Yeah, because I'm down here on verse 11, it says Adonai threw huge
hailstones, yeah.
Them all the way to the cities,
Right.
So, yeah.
So it looks like, what I mean, just looking at the linguistics of the language, that hornet is actually pointing to more the right arm of Yah.
Mm-hmm.
In his strength and his power and his might doing this. And that it's because he says this is something you can't accomplish with your bows or your swords, and that this was done. And it clearly links those two in Joshua 10 that it's done with hailstones.
And to that, it in itself, by doing it with hailstones coming down, really from Adonai.
Mm-hmm.
Hailstones wasn't normal.
It's not, it's not.
At that time.
No.
And so, I mean, that was a miracle there. They were seeing.
Yeah, it's something divine.
God.
Yeah, it's something divine.
Joshua and them is, we got a God working for them. And I mean,
yep,
that's all it could be, really, because it links back to
right.
Adonai.
But, you have all these thoughts about, well, what exactly is the hornet then?
Yeah. So the hornet,
they don't really know, but even the word that they use there, or that it's used there, doesn't link with me. So, okay. So going back to Deuteronomy 7, another thing I saw in this passage in verse 21.
Which one?
7:21.
Okay. Deuteronomy. Okay.
You are not to be frightened of them, because Yah your Elohim is there with you. What does your verse say there? A God, the version I was reading says, a God great and fearsome.
Mine says, you are not to be frightened of them, because Adonai your God is there with you, a great and fearsome God.
Fearsome.
Mine says great and awful.
Great and awful.
Mine says fearsome.
Okay, so in this verse it says Yah is with you. And in Hebrew it says El Gadol Ve'Norah. El Gadol Ve'Norah. Okay. El, we know, is God. Gadol, he's a great God. Okay. Ve and Norah. Norah is from the root Yare, which means to fear.
I thought Gadol, the Wonder Woman. Her name Gadol.
No, her name is Gadot. Gal Gadot.
Gal Gadot. Okay.
Gadot. Not Gadol. No. Yeah, Wonder Woman. No, Wonder Woman's Gal Gadot. So it's close, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Not in English. I mean, in English it's close, but no. Okay. But when we look at okay, so it says Norah, which is to fear. But I got to searching, that phrase, Gadol Ve'Norah, is also used in the next chapter. Turn over to chapter 8 and verse 15. Okay.
15.
8:15. Who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein there were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, while there was no water, who brought thee forth out of the rock of flint. It's in that verse too. Gadol Ve'Norah. But it's not talking about God being called that. It's talking about the desert. who led you through the great and terrible desert, which is interesting that Eddie's version was the only version that said the word terrible there. So the desert is called great and terrible. Okay, or great and terrible. But most translations, if you go back to 721, don't translate God as being great and terrible. So they're, because we think about in our mindset of terrible, we're thinking something that's awful, not good, whatever. But this is from that word yare, which is fear. If you are fearing something, it is putting all in front of you. That's where we get the word awesome from. It's putting that all in front of you. It's causing you to, be feared. And so in Deuteronomy 7 and verse 21, he says, you are not to be frightened of them because Yah, your Elohim, is there with you. He is a El Gadol Ve'Norah. He is to be feared. Okay, in verse 22, Yah, your Elohim, will expel those nations ahead of you little by little. You can't put it into them all at once, or the wild animals will become too numerous for you. And so I got to thinking about this, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Yah's all powerful. Why didn't he just get rid of the inhabitants for him?
Because we have a part.
We got a part. Yeah. And notice what it says in that verse. He's only going to do it little by little.
Yeah, one disaster after another.
Yeah. Why little by little?
The wild beasts increase.
He says the wild beasts will increase, but he can control them.
Yeah.
Is it because of the tiresomeness of the battles? If it's all at one time?
It could be that. Or to me, I got to thinking about it's about the process. When do we learn?
Mm-hmm.
When we're going through trials.
Yeah. And if they go through them little by little, then they learn it
little by little. Yeah. And if you think about it, Yah could do it for them.
Yeah.
He could do it for them. And well, if he did it for you, are you really going to have a connection with it?
No,
okay. Just think about
really.
Okay. Just think about. Okay, this is part 2. Actually, we lost power, and so we didn't realize until after everything was done that the second part did not get recorded. So I'm going back and recording the part that did not get recorded. So you won't have any comments from any others on this part. So I'm sorry. But power just went off, and actually everybody was stayed on, but when we went through with the study, but the second part just did not get recorded. So we stopped when we were talking about that this is a process. It's we learn by these trials, and Yah, could do it for us, but we wouldn't have any responsibility in the process. And it's like, if you're one of those parents that are overprotective and you see your child that's about to fall, or they're running through the house and something that's about to happen, and you move stuff out of the way and you never let them experience anything bad, any trials, then they're not really going to learn not to do that. And it seems like Yah is wanting us to be a part of it. He wants us to act. He wants us to learn. He knows what is best for us, and the process is to mature us. And this made me think about, sometimes, we all, including me, and I know everybody in the group was talking about, we've all made the comment that, God doesn't give us more than we can handle, talking about these sufferings that we're going through. But when you look at that verse, and let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, this is what it says. It says, no temptation has seized you beyond what people normally experience, and that God can be trusted not to allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. On the contrary, along with the temptation, he will also provide the way out so that you will be able to endure. So what I got to really looking at is that this verse is not really about suffering. It is about temptation. Yah doesn't allow us to be tempted more than we could bear. And one of the things I know that Mike brought out in the conversation was that it's our own desires that lead us astray when we're tempted, because if you look at that verse, he says, even though we're tempted, he provides a way out. But it's our own desire, like Mike was pointing out, it's our own desires that lead us astray oftentimes. Now, going back to the parsha, Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 1. And all of the mitzvot that I'm giving you today, you are to take care to obey so that you will live, increase your numbers, and enter and take possession of the land that Yah swore to your ancestors. Why are we given these commands? It's so that we may live in the land. And there are many mitzvot or commands or, that we don't necessarily understand why we're to do them. And there's a lot of them that we can't do because we're not necessarily living in the land. And those that we can't do while we're living in the, because we're not in the land, we're trying to do still outside of the land as practice. It is a practice for living in that land. And when you look at that verse, chapter 8, verse 1, I really like the way the Hebrew says this because, when it says take care to obey, in the Hebrew, it's tishmarun la'asot, which is actually, we said tishmaru earlier was about, to hear in the future and to do. But it's also, when we think about Shema, it's not only hearing, but it's guarding. Shamar, you are to guard. And when you look at this, it says la'asot, guard your doing, to do. Guard that you do these things. And then, I got to thinking about, last week I even mentioned about guarding and protecting, that we should be guarding our doing. We should be guarding our actions here, what we're doing. Okay, Deuteronomy 8:2. You are to remember everything of the way in which Yah led you these 40 years in the desert, humbling you and testing you in order to know what was in your heart, whether you would obey his mitzvot or not. He humbled you, allowing you to become hungry, and then he fed you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, to make you understand that a person does not live on food alone, but on everything that comes from the mouth of Yah. During these 40 years, the clothing you were wearing did not grow old, your feet did not swell up. Think about it deeply. Yah was disciplining you just as a man disciplines his child. So obeying the mitzvot of Yah your Elohim, living as he directed and fearing him. For Yah your Elohim is bringing you into a land of streams, springs and water welling up from the depths of the valleys and on the hillsides. It is a land of wheat and barley, grapevines, fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. A land where you will eat food in abundance and lack nothing on it. A land where the stones contain iron and the hills can be mined for copper. So that you will, so you will eat and be satisfied, and you will bless Yah your Elohim for the land he's given you. Be careful not to forget Yah your Elohim by not obeying his mitzvot, ruling and regulations that I'm giving you today. Otherwise, after you've eaten and been satisfied, built fine houses and lived in them, and increased your herds, flocks, silver, gold, and everything else you own, you will become proud-hearted, forgetting Yah your Elohim, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, where you lived as slaves. And so part of allowing them to be hungry was so that they could learn to rely on Yah. And, I mentioned this, just a few minutes ago, that the problem is when things are going well, we forget Yah. We become prideful, or a lot of times people think that they've got all of this stuff or prosperous because of what they did. And, most people don't call on Yah when things are great. It's when things are going bad that they really turn to Yah. And if it's when we're prospering that he continues to remind, he's telling us, don't forget Yah. He warns us that we haven't gotten these things by our own actions. It is only by him that we've gotten these things. In verse 17, you will think to yourself, My own power and the strength of my own hand has gotten me this wealth. No, you are to remember Yah your Elohim, because it is He who is giving you the power to get wealth, in order to confirm His covenant, which He swore to your ancestors, as is happening even today. Now, it's not a problem to be wealthy, but He's doing that and wanting you to realize He's trying to confirm His covenant, and so that you understand His covenant there. And, like I said, today we get caught up in things going on in our life, just in our daily life. And one of the things that a friend had mentioned was that a lot of times she used to wake up in the morning and she would think about all the things that she needed to accomplish that day. The minute she got up, she started just racking off a list of to-do list in her head, and this, and this, and that Yah started dealing with her on that. And she really started then changing how she did. Instead of waking up and thinking of all the things that she needed to do that day, she woke up and she started praising Yah and thinking of all the things that Yah has done for her, and asking Him what she could do for Him that day, instead of thinking of, I've got all these things to do. And a lot of times, you didn't get your to-do list accomplished, but you were busy doing things for Him that day. And how much of it is an example for us? If we can remember to do that every day. And I heard another example of, a Torah observant man who was in England, and his mentor was actually, they were going on a trip together, and he started noticing that, because, they spend time together, but, a long period of time, and you're with each other 24/7, that they were on this journey, and that his friend, his mentor, his alarm went off on his phone. And the first one, he glanced at it and he happened to see that it said hallelujah. And then the guy stopped and started just praising Yah and thanking Yah and, lifting Him up. And then the other one, a little bit later in the day, alarm went off again, and he looked at it and he's like, what is that? And it said praise Yah. And so again, the man stopped and started just lifting Yah up and praising Him. And then later that night, another alarm went off, and he looked at it and he saw it said praise Yeshua. And so each time that alarm went off, he would stop whatever he was doing, no matter where he was, if he's walking down the street or what, he would stop and just start doing that prayer. And he had a different way of praying for each one of those. And I thought this was another great example, because we get so caught up. And a lot of times, we're busy and we think, most people have their phones with them, and they'll set an alarm for various different things. Oh, I got to take my medicine, or I've got to, get up at this time, or I've got to go meet this person, or whatever. And they'll set those alarms as reminders. How much more to use your phone to remind you to pray or praise Yah? I mean, this is a great tool to use that phone, which could be horrible, but use it for good, and to not get prideful, and to keep our focus on Him. Now, going back and look at verse 10 in chapter 8, it says, you'll eat and be satisfied, and you will bless Yah your Elohim for the good land that He's given you. And, this is a reason why many, say the blessing after the meals, because, in the Hebraic mindset in Judaism, there is no such concept of blessing the food. They bless Yah. It's all about blessing Yah, because in the ancient Near East and much of the pagan world, they had food blessings, where they would bless the food. They prayed that the gods would, bless their food, because, sometimes the gods were frivolous and they would get mean and angry and, might do something to their food. So they would actually have these blessings over the food. But in Judaism, it is not the food that is doing it. It's Yah. You bless Yah. He's giving you that food. Now, going back and look at verse 8, 8:8, this is where it's referred to as the 7 species. And these are the 7 foods that were growing in the land of Israel. And it's interesting to me that it is 7, because in the beginning, we were talking about the 7 nations that were to be conquered in the land. And then there was the 7 blessings. And then now we've got the 7 species. And when we look at these 7 species, we have wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranate, olive oil, and honey. And, I believe that there is a connection between these 7 species and the spirit of Yah. If we go to Revelation, and actually we're going to go to a few places in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, to the angel of the Messianic community in Sardis, write, here is the message from the one who has the 7-fold Spirit of God and the 7 stars. I know what you're doing. You have a reputation for being alive, but in fact, you're dead. Okay, so here we see that there's a 7-fold Spirit of God. And if we go over to the next chapter of Revelation, in Revelation 4, in verse 1, after all these things, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven, and the voice like a trumpet, which had heard speaking with me before, said, come up here, and I will show you what must happen after all these things. And instantly I was in the Spirit, and there before me in heaven stood a throne, and on the throne was someone sitting, and the one sitting there gleamed like diamonds and rubies, and a rainbow shining like emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and the thrones sat 24 elders dressed in white clothing and wearing gold crowns on their heads. And from the throne came forth lightnings, voices, and thunderings. And before the throne were 7 flaming torches, which are the 7-fold Spirit of God. And if we go to the next chapter, Revelation 5 and 6, then I saw standing there with the throne and the 4 living beings in the circle of the elders, a lamb that appeared to have been slaughtered. And he had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7-fold Spirit sent out into all the earth. So the 7 eyes here are referred to as being the 7 spirits. And, if we go back to Zechariah, in Zechariah chapter 3 and verse 9, we've got, for look at the stone that I put in front of Yahushua. On one stone with 7 eyes. I will engrave what is to be written on it, says Yah Zebaot, and I will remove the guilt of this land in one day. And in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 10, for even someone who doesn't think much of a day when such minor events take place will rejoice at seeing the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. So these are the 7 are the eyes of Yah that range about all over the earth. So does that mean Yah has 7 eyes? No, there's one stone, one Yah, and then we see that there's 7 spirits here. Isaiah 28 and verse 16, therefore, here's what Yah Elohim says. Look, I'm laying in Zion a tested stone, a costly cornerstone, a firm foundation stone. He who trusts will not rush here nor there. And in Psalms 118:22, the very rock that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. So we know that these are in a reference to Yeshua. So Yeshua is the stone with 7 eyes or 7 spirits. So what are those 7 spirits? We'll go to Isaiah 11 and verse 2. It gives us a list. We have the Spirit of Yah will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom, understanding, counsel, power, the Spirit of knowledge, and fear of Yah. And, here we are a people just like them that were on the verge of entering into the promised land. And, they were told, if you follow his commands, and that the land was going to be filled with these 7 species that are basically representing that Yah's fullness, Yah's spirit. And it's just, Yeshua here, that this is going to be represented in the physical in the land. And I think too that these 7 parallel the 7 things, not only you think back to, we were talking earlier about the 7 nations, but I think it also parallels what happens later in Deuteronomy chapter 10 in verse 12. There are 7 things that Yah asked them to do. Deuteronomy 10:12, it says, so now Israel, all that Yah, your Elohim, asks from you is to fear Yah, your Elohim, follow all of his ways, love him and serve Yah, your Elohim, with all your heart and with all your being, to obey for your own good the mitzvot and the regulations of Yah that I'm giving you today. See the sky and the heaven beyond the sky, the earth and everything on it belong to Yah, your Elohim. Only Yah took enough pleasure in your ancestors to love them and choose their descendants after them, yourselves and above all people, as he still does today. Therefore, circumcise the foreskin of your heart and don't be stiff-necked any longer. So when you look at this list, there are 7 things. He tells them to fear Yah, to walk in his ways, to love him, to serve him, to guard his mitzvot, his mitzvot and his regulation, his hukim, and to circumcise their hearts and don't be stiff-necked. And so I see all of these things tying in with the obedience and the blessings, not only physical blessings, but the blessings of the land if they're obeying him. And going back to those 7 species that, the blessings of the land there, I think too, those are all pointing and tied to the feast. When we look, we've got wheat and barley, the first 2, and the wheat and barley are tied together because the barley harvest is in the spring, and then you count 50 days later, 50 days, and then we have the wheat harvest. And so we've got a picture of Passover and then counting up to Shavuot. And then we see the grapes. Well, the grapes is the harvest that's in the middle of the summer. And it's usually in Israel from June to September. And, really we don't have a feast that happens during this time, but what is this time period called during the summer? This is when we have the month of Av. This is when, it's leading up to Yom Teruah at the beginning of the fall feast. And I saw this picture, thinking about the grapes here, Revelation 14 and verse 19, where it says, and the angel swung his sickle down on the earth and gathered the earth's grapes, and he threw them into the great winepress of God's fury. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horses' bridles for 200 miles. And so when I think about, what is this, what's going on here? Why is this linked with the grapes? Because this is leading up to Yom Teruah, which is the great, terrible day of Yah. It's the day of his judgment. But what happened on the 9th of Av was Yah's judgment for them not obeying his commands. And then we see the next harvest, the fall harvest. And we've got the figs and the pomegranate and the olive oil and the honey there. And all of these remind us of, the Torah and Sukkot, because that is when we are, dwelling and living in the land with him. And so Moshe really emphasizes the importance of the land. Not only were they going to be going into the promised land and across the Jordan, but this land, if we go back down to it, in Deuteronomy 11:11, it says, the land that you are crossing over to take possession of is a land of hills and valleys, which soaks up the water when the rain falls from the sky. It is a land Yah, your Elohim, cares for. The eyes of Yah, your Elohim, are always upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And so Yah's eyes are always on the land of Israel. We may not agree with politics or what's happening with the leaders or everything, but just because you have, you may have a bad leader or you may have a bad priest or something, Yah did not do away with that promise. That's just like today. That promise of the king coming from the line of David is forever. Just because you had David's descendants, some of them were good, some of them were not so good. And you see some of these kings that come in like Ahab that were awful. But Yah didn't do away with that. He kept his promise there to David and made sure it was forever. And it's the same with the land. Yah's eyes are upon the land. And that's his land. And it's his heart. And so, when Yeshua says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, what is that place called? It's not New Tel Aviv. It's not New Babylon. It's not New Hong Kong or New New York. It is the New Jerusalem. So it is about the land of Israel. And so that's really what I wanted to, focus on with this parasha is all about obedience and the blessings with obedience. And we're not doing it because it is how we are saved. We are doing it because we are saved. This is a result of showing our love for Yah. I mean, when you love your spouse, you do things for them, not because they're telling you you have to do all of this. It is because you want to show them you love them. And that is the same with Yah. We follow his commands to show him we love him and how much we love him. So, Shabbat Shalom. I hope you had a great study and had a great Shabbat. And hopefully, these two videos will be able to merge and you will be able to see the end. Shabbat Shalom. Till next time.